Human beings are the apex of all apex predators on the planet, and we love telling stories about how we're all gonna die. A nice chat with Robopocalypse author Daniel H. Wilson and Carnegie Mellon professor of robotics Chris Atkeson. Ahead on Science Goes to the Movies. Welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Faith Saley. Today we're talking robots with roboticists Chris Atkeson, professor at the Robotics Institute and Human-Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, and Daniel H. Wilson, a New York Times best-selling author and robotics engineer. Hello, thank you both for being here. Hi, Daniel.
Hey. Happy to be here.
You're our first Skype guest, so don't screw this up.
Okay, I promise I'll do my best.
All right, good. We're here to talk robots. Okay, so let's start with the newly imagined character Robot in the Netflix reboot of Lost in Space. Danger, Will Robinson. Your robot reboot may be a gentle creature capable of love and morality, or he may kill you. Okay, so in Lost in Space, when the robot imprints on Will Robinson, it changes its form to look more human. It has these kind of like 4 insecty legs, even though insects have 6 legs. And then the legs turn into these kind of sinewy human arms. So Chris, in real life robotics, does it help to make the robot seem like human-like so we can understand the machine better?
It does. However, from an engineering point of view, I would like to take care of people, such as my 84-year-old mother, with something that looks like a giant spider. So it could have 4 legs on the ground, and the other 4 legs could be arms to do stuff. And that would make the robotics easy, but it would really freak my mother out.
Me too, yeah. So you're sort of sacrificing ease and efficiency to make something a little bit anthropomorphic?
I think that's what we have to do to take care of people now. But every generation gets used to sort of new technology. If I told you or told my parents that I was going to take a camera into the bathroom, they would freak out as well. But basically everybody nowadays takes cameras into the bathroom on their cell phone, and notions of privacy have completely changed. I expect kids today will be quite happy being taken care of with giant spiders or cockroaches.
Really?
Absolutely. Remember that they're being brought up on today's movies, so they'll have a much more expanded picture of what's acceptable.
Well, Daniel, let me ask you, as a writer creating a fictional robot, do fictional robot characters have to have some element of, robot as something recognizable to make them work in a story?
I think that it helps a lot because people are mostly interested in other people. So, in my particular case, in my writing, I love that robots resemble humans, but they aren't necessarily human, because it really provides me a way to examine humanity. So I'll take a character that is like a person, and I'll strip away aspects of humanity until I have a very robotic character. And you start to wonder, is this person still human? Or I'll take a robot character and add attributes that are very humanistic until you start to wonder, like, should we treat this entity as another person? And robots really provide this scalpel for dissecting the idea of what it means to be human. Now, as for what Chris is talking about, I think that he's always looking for a way to make the engineering easier at the expense of freaking people out. To speak for having a humanoid robot in the environment, if you invite a robot to the party of being human, then they get to use all of the equipment that we have. They get to walk in all of the buildings that we've built. They get to take advantage of all the human infrastructure. So there's a lot to be said for facing the engineering challenges that come from our arbitrary embodiment as humans in order to take advantage of all the human infrastructure, as opposed to building giant bugs, which, Chris, the latest round of movies may have just instilled new levels of terror in children, and they're going to grow up fearing all of these robot bugs and everything more than
Daniel,
we do now.
Daniel, you got to admit, we ought to have eyes in the back of our heads, and it's sort of an accident of nature. In fact, one of the things I'm proposing is putting eyeballs in our hands so that when we pick things up, our hands don't block our vision. This is just good engineering.
It would be so much easier to curl my lashes if I could do it like that.
Absolutely.
I think now is a very good time to let our audience know that Daniel was at one time your student, Chris, if you're wondering about the dynamic here.
That's right. You never grow up in some sense.
All right, so question for both of you, and I'll start with you, Professor. In real life, are the emerging forms of robotics a new kind of machinery that we haven't seen before, or do they all rest on the shoulders of machines that came before?
That is sort of like asking, is a glass half full or half empty? I'm a history buff, so I spend a lot of time looking at the historical roots of our robots. The sort of modern robotics era started in the 1950s, and you can find various figures there who built little maze-solving robots. But you can go back thousands of years to find machines that had perception and then took action, which is a simple definition of a robot.
Okay, so with that simple definition of a robot, I'm curious, what would you say is the oldest robot we know of?
So I believe the Egyptians had automatic door openers in their temples based on hydraulics, using water.
Oh, that's interesting. Daniel, what about you? As a writer, do you delve into history of this stuff?
Yeah, my latest novel is called The Clockwork Dynasty, and it is exactly all about this stuff. And the reason I love it is because you realize that people have this sort of basic human impulse to try to create simulacrum of real life. You know, they create robots, and we've been doing it for thousands of years. So there are, Chris, there are those tea-serving robots from the Edo period in Japan.
Absolutely.
And, you know, there's just all kinds of stuff that's just become mythology.
I want to point out there was a story about Robot in the reboot of Lost in Space that some people were finding its very human-like glutes a real turn-on. Like there was an entire story devoted to how hot this robot's butt is.
That's
I'm not sure that we can really go there on this show, but one of the measures of success, if you're going to build a robotic animal, is whether real animals try to mate with it. That's how you know you've succeeded.
That makes so much sense. Huh, there's a lot there. Let's talk about the scary robot dogs in Black Mirror in season 4, episode 5, called Metalhead. Those writers reached into Boston Dynamics laboratory and took a big scoop of intellectual property in the design of that episode's killer robot dog. If Boston Dynamics were building fictional robots, this would be a clear copyright infringement. So what do you guys think? Is it okay to reach into a real science lab and take their designs for a fictional show, Chris?
Let me take a shot at that, and then I'll let Daniel, since he's in the business of doing that kind of stuff. There are a couple things going on. You have to realize that there's a difference between American research and, say, Japanese research. Much of American research is funded by the military. We're really good at making outdoor robots that just sort of plow through bushes and trees. The Japanese have very little military-funded research, so instead their robots are all about indoors and serving people. So Boston Dynamics, for most of its history, was making military robots, and they would have been very happy that this threatening portrayal of their robot dog was what's out there. But recently they were bought by a Japanese company, and they're now aimed at consumer applications, and they're horrified that this is the portrayal of the robot. They very much want people to see their robots and think Bambi. And I can tell you the Japanese roboticists have been doing this for years. They're all about making their robots really cute. And they're 4 feet tall, and they have huge eyeballs that make you think they're children.
They're like Hello Kitty-izing their
Absolutely.
robots. Yeah.
Because, you know, they have focused on a very clear message. Robots are cute. Robots are your friend.
I can take that kind of robot, but Daniel, you don't necessarily write all about cute robots. What do you think about lifting inspiration from real labs?
I think it's great. I mean, look, you're always going to have to balance the science fiction sort of pop culture element of robots with what's actually happening in the labs. And, the instinct for writers is going to be to go for drama and go for, I mean, robots can be pretty terrifying, especially the Boston Dynamics robots. But that's going to happen no matter what. And my feeling is when writers, especially teams of writers, I remember when I was a student at Carnegie Mellon, Pixar guys came through and they figured out that big circular robot from The Incredibles based on doing all this research. And, is that robot scary? Yeah. Is it realistic? In a lot of ways it is. And I feel like since we're going to have the negative portrayals either way, at least they should be informed, And also when you have writers that are interacting with scientists, they're going to realize that there's a human side to the robot, that these are real people that are really trying to help other people. They're building robots for a reason. And usually they're not building robots to conquer the world or destroy the world. They're doing it to help other people. And I think it's good for writers to see that.
Well, here's a fun fact. The word robot comes from fiction and not science. First performed in 1921, Karel Capek's play R.U.R., or as it's known in America, Rostam's Universal Robots, featured synthetic humans built by people to serve. The play was written in Czech, and the word robot is derived from the Slavic word rob, meaning slave. And guess what the very first fictional robots did back in 1921? They destroyed the human race. After that, there's a boatload of human-destroying fictional robots pretty much up until the 1950s when we get Astro Boy, the Japanese manga series written and illustrated by Osamu Tezuka. Did Astro Boy change the way we saw robots, do you think, Chris?
It certainly changed how I thought about robots. I grew up watching Astro Boy. So it made a big difference to me. It certainly has made a huge difference to the Japanese people. And I think for the Americans that it actually reached, I think it was a very positive portrayal of robotics. I think it's important to realize that the ideology of robotics was sort of laid out long before the technical aspects of robotics. We've been wanting servants for a long time. And there is a huge literature about servants or slaves. And there's also fear of servants or slaves revolting. And whether those are human servants or slaves or machine servants or slaves, the ideology has been around as long as sort of Stone Age tribes enslaved other Stone Age tribes.
Do you have a fear of robots revolting?
No.
Why not?
Because I'm old enough that it's really not going to be an issue.
How do you know?
I've dedicated my career to making robots help people. A really interesting question is, are we going to have robots decide what to do in the same way that people do it? I don't think we will. I don't think we're going to have a robot sitting there and having the same thought pattern as a human, growing up like a teenager and rebelling against their parents or masters or any of that. We're going to program robots to be our servants, period. End of story.
But what if somebody who doesn't think like you programs a robot to do bad things?
Everybody gets all excited about artificial intelligence and all that. If you want something to worry about DNA and biotechnology. It's far more likely that a teenager will invent the new Ebola and kill us all than someone will make a robot that does the same thing.
Daniel, do you ever worry about robots revolting? Because you write about some scary robots.
I do. And if you look at the history of robots in pop culture, and particularly in the West, then you do see lots and lots of examples of them rising up and killing everybody. I think in reality, robots provide this very easy way to externalize our fears of technology and change into something that we can, shoot in the face with a shotgun in the form of a killer robot and sort of walk away and feel like we won. So if you look at the history of it, you see robots really sort of representing the fears of our society decade after decade. And so, what they were afraid in the 1920s? They were worried about the working class rising up and wiping out all of their overlords. And so that's what that play was about. I'm really excited because now that this technology has made the leap from being completely made up stuff, just movie monsters, robots or guys in rubber suits running around fighting, Flash Gordon. They've made this leap into reality. And as a result, I think that our narrative and our stories that we're telling about killer robots and robots in general have matured. So yeah, we're still seeing the robot uprising stories, and thank goodness, because yeah, part of my career depends on that. But we're also seeing stories about falling in love with our technology, or our technology judging us, or we're getting all these really complex stories that are, I think, we're owed that because this technology has really become part of our real world, and so we should have more complicated stories about it.
You guys are on the cutting edge of robotics. How close are these facts to fictions? And by that I mean, are Astro Boy or C-3PO or Star Trek's android Data, are they going to be possible anytime soon?
It's far more realistic that your cell phone, which a little product placement here, I have a Baymax cell phone, is going to be intelligent, and we're going to have relationships with our cell phones. That's going to happen really fast. The Siris, the Alexas, all that stuff, it'll remember what you say. It'll begin to have sort of a individual personality for you, and people are going to have relationships with their phones. It's going to be much longer before the phone brain is put into a body with arms and legs. That's just because the technology for computers sort of exponentially got cheaper, but the technology for motors and mechanical engineering has sort of only gotten a little bit cheaper at a sort of linear rate.
Let's talk about the marshmallowy superhero Baymax from Disney's Big Hero 6 movie.
I was thrilled when Disney made the movie Big Hero 6 and based their inflatable robot Baymax on some of my work. And that allowed my work to have a tremendous impact, way beyond what I could do. What's more, they made a far better story about how this robot could help people than we had. So that was a shining example of things going very well.
In the movie, the character Hero says, "My brother built Baymax to help." Is that kind of what all robots are meant to do? I mean, in real life, who makes a robot in order to hurt?
I would like to say that all roboticists want to help. The role of military research is very, it's very complex. The military does a lot of good things. A big component of what they do is handle natural disasters and rescue and whatnot. But, humans have been fighting each other for a long time. And some of our research is oriented towards fighting more effectively. And that's something every researcher, but every citizen has to struggle with.
Do you have anything to add to that, Daniel?
Well, I mean, yeah, there are obviously military applications for robots. And in terms of thinking of the killer robot in pop culture, the question that I have is not, why are all these robots so dangerous? But the question is, why are these robots in pop culture deciding to do terrible things? I mean, that's the least plausible aspect of science fiction scenarios of robot uprisings, are these situations where the robots have they decided to do something bad that they weren't programmed to do, and then they go off and they sort of become sentient and decide to attack everybody. Robots, some of them are dangerous, but the fact that they would defy all their programming and just decide to become dangerous, that seems not very plausible to me.
In Big Hero 6, Baymax is a personal diagnostic device. He pops out of his suitcase and quickly scans you for injury or illness. Chris, when are we going to have it? Can we get that, please? Now? Soon?
You're going to get that very soon.
Really?
Right now, we're seeing add-ons to cell phones that are very cheap. Things like a thermal camera where I can scan your exterior temperature. That's very helpful with diagnostics. You can get little ultrasound units, and if you want to watch your heartbeat or something like that, you can do that. The big step forward is when your cell phone's going to get access to your blood chemistry. And then we could pretty much eliminate going to the doctor unless you have an obvious problem. And you can actually track your blood chemistry, things like diabetes.
That would be external? You wouldn't need to draw blood?
There are a lot of ways to do it. I have colleagues who want to do it optically, who want to see through your skin and use that to keep track of what's going on chemically in your blood. And it turns out you might think your skin's not really transparent, but it's a lot more transparent than you think. And with really smart computers, you can actually reconstruct what's going on underneath the skin optically using photons.
All right, let's move to the dark side and talk about Robopocalypse. Written by my new best friend, Daniel H. Wilson. Hi, Daniel. Robopocalypse is the terrifying tale of humanity's last stand against the robot uprising. And a guy named Michael Bay is on board to direct this story of how mankind destroys itself by creating better and better machines. Daniel, it's a great story, but how could you? I mean, don't you love Astro Boy and Baymax?
I do, and I have to apologize to all the roboticists out there, but if you really read deeply into Robopocalypse, you start to realize that the robots aren't necessarily the bad guys, that there's actually something worse coming down the pike, and everything that's happening is happening for a reason. So, whether that'll be captured in the movie or not, I have no idea, but I like to think that I at least didn't totally throw all the roboticists under the bus.
What about the freeborn robots? How are they different than the Singularity?
So yeah, because they're embodied as humanoid robots, I think that's the main difference. I mean, this is really something I wanted to think about, is if you don't have an embodiment as a living creature, can you fundamentally understand, what it means to live and die and to operate in the world as a living creature? And so part of Robopocalypse, what I wanted to do was push humanity all the way to the edge and have a very realistic acknowledgement that we don't survive without our tools, right? You see a lot of movies where humans fight robots and then one side wins and that's the end, But in reality, we have to have our tools to survive. And so as humanity progresses through Robopocalypse, the first thing they do is, this starts out in a Native American community, and they have to accept outsiders into their community. Then they accept human beings who've had robotic modifications. And finally, they accept the freeborn, who are, sentient robots. And you realize they've got to use these tools in order to survive this robopocalyptic scenario.
Why is the story of a killer robot so compelling for humans?
I think that there are a lot of answers to that, thankfully, because I write a lot about it. At its core, I think there's this very human aspect of building tools, right? I mean, it's the one thing that human beings do. We have to do this thing or we'll die, right? If we don't build tools, nature will kill us pretty quickly. But every tool we build is potentially dangerous, right? So we have this paradox at the heart of being human. We have to do this thing that could kill us. And robots are really the embodiment of that thing, right? Whenever you write a story and you've got these technological children of humanity that are out there actively competing with us or trying to help us or harm us, you really see just the embodiment of that central paradox.
In the movies, most roboticists are men. Is that true in real life?
Unfortunately, the numbers are such that that's true. It's about 10% women.
Why?
That's a really interesting question. In original work in computer science, for example, there was almost 50% women. And then when computers really took off, that dropped down. And a lot of people are scratching their heads about that. At Carnegie Mellon, we're now backed up to an undergraduate class of roughly 50-50. So in computer science, that's happening. Engineering has had terrible numbers in terms of women, much worse than computer science. And robotics sort of has that engineering component. So whatever the problems of engineering are, robotics shares them.
Daniel, do you want to weigh in?
I'm sure science fiction has something to do with it and pop culture. Because if you don't see, yourself portrayed in those roles, then maybe you are less likely to imagine yourself doing that stuff. I know I've got 2 daughters, and I hope that they want to do robotics someday. And in the stuff that I write, I try to make sure that, you know, I have everybody represented in terms of being out there doing this as good guys, as bad guys, just keeping it equitable and making sure that everybody can see a future with them in it doing robotics.
What should we look for next from you, Daniel, in the bookstore?
I have a collection of short stories right now called Guardian Angels and Other Monsters that just came out. And then I have the paperback of The Clockwork Dynasty, which is a novel about robots that have been working behind the scenes in civilization for thousands of years. So both of those are pretty exciting and pretty fun.
One last question. Do you remember what grade you gave Daniel, Chris? Or does one of you remember what grade you got?
He did very well, straight A's. In fact, he instrumented his house and used the sort of a super burglar alarm system and motion sensors anywhere to figure out what he was doing every day. So he built sort of a smart house that spied on people. Now, in his thesis, he said this is going to help people, but clearly something went wrong somewhere along the way.
I lived inside of a robot, you know, for a couple of years, and you know, and then I decided to write science fiction where robots kill everybody. So I don't know if it's a causal thing or not.
You guys are a great team, actually. You're like the odd couple of robotics. So thank you both for joining us.
And thank you.